Can you describe your initial feelings and expectations before you started your very first paddleboarding session?
Personally, before my paddleboarding session, I was a bit nervous. I'd never really done it before, so I was a bit shaky before it. And the water I felt it was quite cold, but I was excited to try the new thing and see, how fun it was and if it was a bit of me, and see if I liked it or see if I didn't.
What was the paddleboarding location like? Could you walk me through some of the key moments or challenges you encountered?
Well, the location, it was a bit wet on the day, so it was raining. I thought it was going to be heavier rain, but it turns out it wasn't as bad. It was just drizzling the whole time. So we did get wet from that. The water, it's just a river. Yeah, absolutely fine. There were, it was quite open, lots of space, and as you went further round, it was really quite scenic, and there were some horses, some houses, and it was quite fun. When we got round to one of the open spaces, we had to practice turning round, which was one of the challenges that I faced. As well as this, we did some relay races, which we had to change balls with someone on our team, so luckily I didn't fall in, but one of my teammates did fall in. That was a challenge, so yeah.
What surprised you most about paddleboarding?
I think the thing that surprised me most about paddleboarding was that it was quite tiring, and my arms were quite tired afterwards, as you just have to paddle and paddle. I thought that was quite a surprising thing. I thought it would personally be a bit easier, and it was quite hard at times. So there were times there where I thought, this is a bit, heavy working and difficult, but eventually you just get the hang of it, and then you get used to the movements, and then it becomes a lot easier. Thinking back to my paddleboarding session, there were lots of key positive moments where I had to work in a team. We had to work together to try and achieve something great, like winning the relay races. We had to work as a team to work out who was going first, second, third, and try to win that. I did notice some physical benefits which could have been improved while I was out paddleboarding. For example, balance was a key physical attribute that you would have needed for paddleboarding, especially when you attempt to stand up, as when you stand up you need to keep your legs, in a good, still stationary position so that you don't wobble side to side. So you want to make sure you're keeping in the middle. Balance was key. As well as that, muscular endurance was also quite a key physical attribute that was needed, as you had to keep paddling non-stop, because sometimes you'd be paddling one way and you'd suddenly be heading towards a tree or a bush, so the long weeds, that you'd have to then switch it quickly, paddle the other way to get yourself away from that situation. But that's why muscular endurance was needed. I think there were a lot of times where I was on my own at points, because we all sort of spread out along the river, and a couple of us were ahead, a couple of us were behind, a few in the middle, and there were points where you were on your own and you had to try and figure out for yourselves. And but I think that helped an increase in focus for me, and I think it made me feel more confident for when we took part in the relay races. I think I felt more confident as I was able to, I'd learnt the steps with obviously the help from the guide, and then putting it into practice myself and learning the real ways how to do it. So I think I learned that quite well. And there were lots of social benefits from it as well. Of course, the working in a team with the relay races, that was most partly for the social benefit, as well as that I spoke to lots of people who I haven't usually spoken to, so I was exploring options of friends, new colleagues. But yeah, it felt like a good sense of accomplishment, especially once the relay team had finished the race, especially as we didn't come last in some of them. So it felt good to get that accomplishment once we'd all finished, and we were like, we did that, and we were just quite proud of each other. So yeah.
If you had to pick one moment during the paddleboarding session that stands out as particularly beneficial, what would it be and why?
I think if I had to pick out one moment from the paddleboarding session which stands out for me, was personally the relay races, as I think it helped build teamwork and connections within the group that I was in. I thought it was really fun, and it made it more enjoyable as well, because there were competition aspects which we all loved, and it was also quite a bit of a challenge, especially when the guide and instructor told us one of us had to go with our eyes closed, one of us stood up, and one of us with no paddle, which made it a bit interesting, as we had to discuss amongst ourselves, use communication, figure out who's going where, who's doing what, and what's best for the team, and what could we have done. So I think that was quite beneficial as well, especially for the paddleboarding aspect as well, because some of us got to stand up and practice standing up, while others had to try and use their senses. It was all very, very good.
Compared to the other outdoor activities you might have done, what unique benefits did paddleboarding offer?
Obviously, the only other outdoor adventure activity I have done so far is orienteering, which is very different in some aspects, but also very similar in some aspects, as personally, obviously, the obvious, orienteering is not done on the water, but there is teamwork aspects, communication aspects. In paddleboarding, what we did in the relay races had communication skills, had teamwork skills. Also, during paddleboarding, you had to persevere and resilience. If you fell off, you had to get back on and try it again. And same with orienteering. If you're going along, you really had to persevere and just keep going as a team. Really try to get the quickest time as possible. So I think paddleboarding offered more attributes, as in physical attributes, for example, muscular endurance and balance. However, they're two very different things, two very different exercises. Before this session, I had no experience of any paddleboarding or water-based activity like this, as I had never attempted anything like this before. So I was slightly out of my comfort zone, but I was taught by my instructor the specific techniques and guides which I needed to know before I went onto the water. For example, one thing which we did learn was the technique of holding the paddle, and you had to have one hand down the shaft of it and then one hand on the top, and then if you wanted to switch sides, you'd have to switch hands and paddle it the other way, which, you know, it was difficult at times, because sometimes you'd be heading into a tree maybe, and you'd have to quickly turn the other way, so you'd have to quickly adapt to your surroundings and your situations, which occurs. As well as this, there were some more difficult techniques which you had to learn. For example, the standing up. It was difficult to stand up to start with. I attempted it twice, I believe, and the first time I stood up, it's obviously, all it is the balance part. The balance part is quite difficult, as you've got to keep your legs fairly wide apart, and you've got to try and keep them as still as possible so that the board didn't shake and then you didn't fall into the water. But I found that very challenging, for example. That was one of my most challenging parts of paddleboarding. Obviously the standing up technique is very difficult, as while you're up there, you're going to have to adjust the paddle to make it a bit taller, about a hand's height taller. That's what the instructor said. So we had to make sure that was okay. Otherwise, you'd be paddling too short and you would have to bend down slightly, and then the technique wouldn't work. But I think it's really challenging to learn the standing up technique, as you have to have the perfect amount of balance to stay on the paddleboard or you will fall in. And it's really difficult. You just had to, I think you had to keep your feet apart, wide stance, in the middle of the board. I found bending my knees, when bending my knees, my legs were a bit shaky, so I had to try and keep them as straight as possible. I know that's probably not the right technique, but in some cases I did attempt with the bending of the knees just slightly, just for a bit of stability, and sometimes it worked. I attempted this twice, on the way there and on the way back as well, so I think on the second time my technique was a lot better, as I'd attempted it before. But yeah, I think, you know, that paddleboarding skill is can be successful, but obviously you need to stay safe while doing it. And on the paddleboards they had a ankle strap which you strapped yourself to the board, so if you fell off you'd still be connected to the board, so the board wouldn't fly off down the river and you wouldn't float away from the board, so you had nothing to hold on to. So you'd always be near the board, which I think where one of the safety things comes in as well, as you'd be able to keep yourself afloat. As we had the life jackets on as well, so we would just float. So I think, yeah, safety does matter. I think other than the different paddle techniques we learned, I think there were also a lot of other techniques which helped when guiding myself through the water. For example, I think spatial awareness was a good thing to have, because you had to make sure you were looking all around you, just to make sure you weren't bumping into anyone as well, because you had people in front, behind, and if you were going the wrong way you could bump into them, they could fall into the water. So you need to make sure you knew where everyone was, make sure you had space around you, space for the paddle to flow through the water, and then when stopping we were told to put our paddle in the water and push it the other way, so away from us, as it helped us to stop. So if we were heading towards a dangerous situation, well, if we were heading towards another one of my peers, or a tree or a bush or some weeds that we didn't want to go near, I could either turn it really quickly, or just stop the paddle and then paddle off slowly in the other direction to keep away from that situation. So I think that was good. I think that also helps with the decision making and deciding what to do at that very moment in time. For example, there was one point where I was heading towards a tree, so I had to decide whether I was going to stop and then turn myself around and carry on following the group, or if I was going to try and paddle quite fast on that one side to turn, making sure I was heading away from the tree. So I thought that was quite difficult, but decision making, it does help. I think the newly developed skills like the decision making that I just mentioned will help me in other areas of my life, for example with my school and my work life, as obviously you're going to have to make lots of decisions every day. Some could have more of an impact than others. Like it could be, if I'm coaching a group of children, it could be which do I take them on this piece of equipment or a different one, depending on where everyone is, and make the decision based on best for their interests and what they want, which I think is a good skill to have for in the future as well. So thank you paddleboarding for helping me adapt that and learn and increase that decision making in me. I think that there were some unexpected situations when we were out paddleboarding. I thought there were a couple when when the instructor told us for our last relay that we all had to end up on a different board and we had to change boards, that became quite a challenge, and it was quite unexpected, especially as I wasn't expecting him to say that. So we had to paddle all the way to the end, all three of us, and then eventually we had to switch boards with someone else on our team, so we sort of did. We all went across one. I think one of my teammates fell in. However, I stayed on the board, luckily, as the weather conditions were quite cold. The water looked very cold, quite freezing, but it was also raining not quite heavily. It was drizzling, but it was drizzling for most of the session, so obviously we were getting wet anyway, but nothing we could have done about the weather there. But I think we had to adapt, because obviously the wind wasn't helping as it was blowing against us, so we had to maybe paddle a bit harder on some occasions, or paddle in a different direction to help us really adapt to that unexpected situation as well. Before the session began, we were huddled around in a big circle. The instructor we told him our names, we told him, and he was explaining us how to put the paddle boards in the water, so not to break the fins, how to operate them, where to stand, how to operate the paddles. So it was all done before we got onto the water, and then once he demonstrated a few times, and then we got on, and then we followed him down the river, and he was showing us, and he then tried to teach us on the water how to move around and how to stop. So sort of demonstrating while doing, and he gave us some challenges as well. For example, there was one point where the instructor made us try and go around in 2 circles within 10 seconds. That was quite a challenge. I managed to get 1 circle in 10 seconds, which is more than other people, more than some others. So I was quite happy with that. But yeah, he gave us a challenge which I think made us more comfortable on the paddle boards, so we were a bit more confident as we were moving forward throughout the rest of the activity. I think looking back on my paddleboarding experience, I think the most valuable thing that I gained was communicating with others, maybe, and communicating with others I haven't spoken to before, and getting the confidence as well on the water. I think that was a big thing for me, as I'm not the biggest fan of the water, so I thought having the confidence to do that, I thought, was quite a good thing to have, and I would definitely recommend paddleboarding to a friend who's never tried it, because I think if you just want to get away and it's just quite relaxing, especially when you're in a bit of a group by yourself, and you're paddling along, and you had some horses on one side. It was really scenic. Just obviously the weather didn't help the scenic picture, but if it was sunny, it would be incredible to paddle along. I wish the weather was a bit better, as I don't think it would have been as cold when we were on top of the water as well. It would have been nice. However, I still enjoyed my paddleboarding experience, and I would definitely recommend it to others who haven't tried it, as I think you can also learn some life skills which you'd need in your everyday life. This experience has developed my confidence on the water, definitely. I still think the co-steering will be a challenge, as I'm definitely not a fan of the sea. But I think if I go into it the same confidence that I did with paddleboarding, I think I'll be okay. Especially the teamwork in general was good, especially when doing the relay races, as I've said before. It's just overall quite an exciting activity, doing something you've never done before, but especially once you've done it, gaining the confidence to then go, I want to do it again, or I want to do something similar that I've never done before. So I might be interested in doing more paddleboarding activities. I said to one of my friends afterwards that I was considering getting a paddleboard, but I think I might wait until the summer. I think it was the peacefulness as well as heading back and just paddling along, just looking around, just taking it all in. I think that was one of my favourite parts. But yeah, overall, I loved my paddleboarding experience.